especially the last year, the conformity has been really something. And it's pushing us out, honestly. It was less about the leftism and more about the silence and the way that they were all so terrified to speak out and couldn't do it for less fortunate members of their city who they pretend to care about but clearly don't.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I've got a great guest for you this week. I know I say that every week, but it really is true this time. With me today is New York Post columnist, Fox News regular, mom, and my Twitter buddy, Karol Markowicz. Karol, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. For people that don't follow you online, they really should. Your Twitter and your writing, it's pretty interesting stuff. You've got a lot of personality too, unlike some people are just kind of rubes about it, just talking about politics. But I do know that you have a very interesting background, and that's where I want to start. So you were born in the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I was born in the Soviet Union. I came to America when I was a little under 2. And I have lived every day being grateful for it. And it's a really big part of who I am and about, how my family is. And I teach an appreciation to my kids about America because of it. Really blessed and gifted every day that I get to be here. I went through an America hating phase in college, and nothing snapped me back faster than, hearing stories from my parents and my grandmother. And it's a giant part of my identity. I always lead with that because when I sort of didn't talk about it, and somebody would hear me speaking Russian, all of a sudden they'd be like, wait, where did this just come from? So I'm fairly open about it.
What was your family situation there? Like, how did they leave? What was their life like before?
So they were, we are Jews. And there was a moment in the late 70s where Jews were allowed to leave. And so the U.S. had pressured the Soviet Union to let Jews out, and they had given permission to only Jewish Russians to leave as refugees. And so our family had the opportunity to leave. It was one of those cases where things were so bad for you, but because they were so bad for you, you got permission to get out, and your whole life, changed because of it.
And when they came to America, what was it like for your parents? Like, did they start with nothing, or what did they do for work, or what was that like?
First, Soviet Jews had to make a stopover. So it's funny because a lot of these debates that are happening right now about the southern border is the refugees come through several countries before they get here. And so I know personally that's not something you're really allowed to do. We didn't take a direct flight from the Soviet Union to New York. It was you had to stop our family stopped in Italy for almost 4 months. And from Italy, you waited to see which countries would let you in. It was not a given that any country would let you in. You were allowed out, but nobody had let you in yet. So some people waited in Italy up to a year, maybe even longer, until they got permission to enter somewhere. So our family, my father left first. He went through Italy, got to America. He had a job as a cab driver. And then which is why I have an American name, sort of. While he was in the US, he sent my mom a list of all American names that he wanted me to have, because all Russian girl names end with an A, Masha, Sveta, all of them end with an A. And he wanted me to have an all American name. Of course, they had no idea that they were spelling it wrong. And that would, for the rest of my life, mark me as an immigrant. But that's another story.
Yeah, that's funny. I had wondered why your name's spelled Karol with a K.
Yeah, because in Russian, the C is an S sound. So.
Okay, so that would be Sarol.
Sarol, yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't make much sense. So when your parents came here, how did they perceive America? Because I've always found one of the most refreshing things is talking to immigrants. Some of my best friends actually are, where I went to school, there were a lot of international students, and some of them came here and then stayed here for work. And they love America in a way that all the other college students who are from America or from Massachusetts, in my case, think America sucks. But they're like, oh, no, you're totally wrong. Yeah. What were your parents like in terms of how they perceived the country they became a part of?
Well, so it's funny because my father came in 77 and my mom and I came in 78. And in 77, it was the New York City blackout, the summer of Sam. I mean, gas shortages were like, right around then. Things were really falling apart. And there was definitely moments where they were like, did we make a mistake? Not leaving the Soviet Union, but like other people had applied to like Australia or Canada or Israel, like, did we make the right choice here? But they have a lot of stories of just the early days and just being dazzled by America and by New York. Like my father has a story about like going to Bloomingdale's, like a really fancy store in New York City, and like him and his friend waiting outside and thinking like, they won't let us in. Like, obviously we'll have to like show them our wallet or something to get in. Right. And then they just like strolled right in with all the rich people on the Upper East Side, like as if like, as if they just belonged, and they did. So there was a lot of stories like that, but it was absolutely a scary time to land in the US and to just hope that it would work out. So for all the scary times I think that we go through, I think about that. I think about like not speaking the language, Jimmy Carter is president, things are going really bad. But just around the corner is Ronald Reagan and the turnaround and how much better everything gets. And, how America just blossoms during that period. And it's something that I feel is happening or coming towards us also. It has to be. We've gone through so much, like enough already,
Yeah, it would be hard pressed to think that things can't get better, right? It's like, well, how are they going to get worse than 2020? 2020 was pretty trash. But one of the things about your background that's interesting too is you grew up in Brooklyn. What was that like? And what were you in more of a left-leaning environment? When I think New York City today, I think like very far left city, but I don't know necessarily what it was like. Right. Like just a few years ago, of course, when you were growing up.
So it's funny because I live in like the leftist-ish place in the universe. I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn now. I could not be in a more leftist enclave, but actually I grew up in a very immigrant heavy part of Brooklyn, and it's really not that. It's pretty conservative, actually. Russian Jews who ended up in America are a very conservative bloc who is not courted whatsoever by the Republican Party. It's wild. Like, it's really crazy to me. Like all the elected officials in those areas are like conservative Democrats who speak Russian because the Republican Party is just like nowhere to be found. And so, my community is very conservative. So it's never been like hard for me to be outspoken or to sort of just be who I am, because I have a lot of friends and a lot of like just community sort of positive feelings around me that I definitely feel support from. But Brooklyn has gotten way lefter since I was a kid. And a lot of that is immigrants leaving. It's funny because, I think on Twitter, the idea of immigration is like, oh, you're letting in all these like Democratic voters, but like, that's not the case. And so many different cases, I know you and I are on the same page about this, but it's so often not the case. I think that we are just misguided in the way that we just surrender all the immigrant vote to Democrats. And I think Russian Jews are a perfect example of that, an overwhelmingly conservative group that is just not targeted. I think it's crazy. And there's so many other, there's so many other immigrant groups in Brooklyn who are also conservative. And if you look at a map of Brooklyn, I know 2020 and 2016 are not the greatest examples, but when you look at like, let's say those years, the immigrant parts went for Trump, and the sort of white and black native parts went for Biden or for Hillary. Like, people who arrived here from other places overwhelmingly went for Donald Trump. Like,
that's fascinating.
I
would not.
I talked about this on Twitter, but it never kind of became a big story. But if you look at the map of Brooklyn, it's really something.
Yeah, New York City politics are actually really interesting because they're not as homogenous as they seem from the outside. But one thing I'm curious is, how would you kind of describe yourself ideologically? Like, I know you're on the conservative, free market side, but within that, like, what box would you put yourself in? And more importantly, how did you get there? What was your journey to that?
So it's funny because I think that I'm ideologically probably a libertarian, but I describe myself as a conservative. It fits me so much better. I don't feel like a libertarian. I don't know. I'm often in conservative circles the most libertarian person, and then I'll go to I went to Ravi Suave's book party the other night, and I was definitely among the more conservative people in the room. So I'm neither here nor there. And while I'm usually just smaller government, lower taxes, less regulation, all of that, I don't know. Especially in the last year, I've definitely understood the arguments for more conservative control and doing more through government that we need done, because I think, so for example, I want more local control. A great example of that is I think school districts should decide masking policy, but that never works out in our favor ever. It's in Florida, the local school districts are avoiding the DeSantis anti-mask mandate. So Palm Beach County, Miami-Dade, Broward, they're all going against his no mask policy. He said no mask mandates in schools. They said, yes, we will mask mandate. So as a conservative, I'm supposed to just be okay, you decided for yourself, right? But then you look at New York, and New York State does not allow any county to make its own decision. Long Island, several counties in Long Island wanted to make their own masking decision, and they couldn't. So it never works out in our favor, to where I've gotten to maybe we should use the government a little bit better and maybe implement policies more the way we want it, instead of just being oh, well, there's nothing we can do. The local control didn't work out for us yet again. Because when the Democrats are in control, they're not going to give you local control. And when the Democrats are not in control, they're going to demand local control. So we're sort of stuck.
Yeah, no, I understand the frustration that you're coming from, certainly. And that kind of touches on a bigger intra-right debate.
Oh, yeah.
I do wonder, though, because, you're a regular on Fox News. You write for the New York Post, like I mentioned, a bunch of other places, The Spectator, The Examiner. What has it been like for you being inside conservative media with kind of your unique perspective, your unique background? Just how do you perceive it to have changed over the last 5-10 years? Yeah. And what direction do you think conservative media is heading in?
Wow, that's a lot. That's a big question, Brad.
I know, sorry, but this is a topic that really interests me, because like you, I operate in these spaces.
Yeah. For a lot of years, I thought that the Trump, contagion was sort of going to swallow everything up. And I'm not so sure anymore. Even now, I see sort of the Trump right moving away from him a bit. And I do see his hold on things kind of falling apart a little, which is good, because I think that conservative media should be publishing a range of conservative opinion. We sort of need to intra-party fight it out. I hate how we've gotten to where if you say some opinion, you're with those people, but if you have this other opinion, then you're with those people. And it's I don't know. I as somebody who always, I'm very social, and I am friends with people on every side of that. And I hate them all fighting on Twitter. And I hate thinking that because I have one opinion about something or another opinion about something else, that I have to align with those people or these people. Molly Hemingway wrote this story about interviewing Trump in Florida, and she mentioned that she and I were at Mar-a-Lago, and I got all this I did not know you were a Trumper. And I'm in the piece, she says I didn't vote for Trump. So it's sort of but because you hang out with these people or those people, then you must be like this. It's so boring. It's so not what we are. We're counterculture, and we're conservatives are really the nonconformists, and yet we're enforcing this conformity of alliances. It's lame.
Yeah, it's the fights over small differences take up so much time. And I'm with you. You and I are both active on Twitter, but I'm definitely, I don't know about less active, but I'm differently active than I was a few years ago, where I've really stopped engaging in any Twitter beefs or personal fights or ad hominem. I just mute people if they're nasty to me, and don't really read notifications. How do you handle it? You've got twice as many followers as me, and you're a woman. Yeah. So it's much worse for you, I'm sure. How do you handle Twitter?
I've gotten to where I block. I don't even ask questions. I'm not even if you're rude to me, out, you're done. Mute if you're boring and annoying and constantly engaging on stupid things in my mentions, mute. But I would say, and I wrote about this during the Trump presidency, but I stopped calling people names on Twitter. Like I used to be like, you idiot, or like you clown, or whatever. I enjoyed that a lot. And I realized that like a lot of like the criticism that Trump got for his like mean tweets was him name calling, but people called him names all the time. Like Elizabeth Warren, called him the big orange elephant in the room, and that was somehow okay. So I
That was
kind of
like,
wanted
yes, queen.
Right, right. So I wanted to lead by example. If I don't like, that kind of discourse, then I should also cut it out. And it was not easy. It was not easy. I was so used to like the clapback. And I'm from Brooklyn. I mean, I got a range of disses for any number of people. But so I cut out the name calling, and that has made me more like, the Beyonce line, like, I'm not going to let you compromise my Christianity. Like that's me, except without the Christianity because I'm Jewish. But like, I will not let you like make me mad enough to like curse at you or like to call you names. Like if I feel like that, that's block, 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 bye,
Yeah, I don't always live up to it, but that's what I strive for.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, because you mentioned Brooklyn, and my perception of Brooklyn people, maybe this is not super accurate, is just that like even though it's a left-leaning city and a left-leaning area, Brooklyn does not strike me as politically correct or kind of like woke. When I see
It's tough.
the kind of ever-changing kind of like woke standards in media or whatever, I still think, as someone who lives in even DC, when I walk around and I talk to actual people in the city who are probably Biden voters, many of whom are minorities, they're not like worried about gender neutral passports and like defunding the police and all these things. How do you make that difference between the online left and just everyday people?
So unfortunately, I live in the online left. I live in the area that has like AOC signs and like $4 million brownstones with defund the police signs. And like I have decided to set up my life inside Twitter. And it's unfortunate because I really hadn't thought that through. Or like, I would say I always knew I was in a left place. I just never saw the conformity coming. I never saw the lockstep thinking coming. I thought my husband and I lived on the Upper West Side before we moved to back to Brooklyn. He's from Queens. I'm from Brooklyn. We're very lifelong New Yorkers. We thought this is fine. We've always lived among liberals. It's fine. But especially the last year, the conformity has been really something. And it's pushing us out, honestly. The whole not having school last year because Randy Weingarten said so, and nobody questioned it. And nobody, the people in my neighborhood either just set up pods or got their kid a tutor or like moved to their summer home and sent their kids to school there. I know people who were in the Hamptons the whole year or in Connecticut or like any number of places, and didn't push like school vouchers for the people who couldn't afford that. Like that kind of stuff broke me. It was less about the leftism and more about the silence and the way that they were all so terrified to speak out and couldn't do it for less fortunate members of their city who they pretend to care about but clearly don't because they left them completely in the lurch while they moved on, in any number of ways.
Yeah, and I read your New York Post columns all the time, and that's been a theme at least since the pandemic. Maybe you did it before, but it doesn't stand out as much in my mind. About you writing about kids, about schools, as a mother, as a person who has seen how much it can screw people over when unions shut down schools. What do you think has been the big takeaway of the last year and a half for mothers and people with kids who've had to go through all this? Because people like me, right, like not only gay but single and in our 20s, like I hear about this from people.
We're jealous of you people.
I'm sympathetic, but I'm not like, I can't really imagine what it must be like.
Right. So it's funny because it wasn't my beat. Like children were not my beat. I was not like a child writer or an education writer. Like I'd hit those topics sometimes, but not really. I wrote a lot about general culture. I would hit other things like, foreign policy or the economy or immigration or whatever. But that the last 20 months really exposed to me something about American culture and especially about urban American culture where I can't stop. I write about it every day now. It's like, it's really exposed that kids are put last. Schools were not even on the radar in so many places, in places like Europe, which I hate complimenting Europe at the expense of America. That's like the least likely thing that I would ever do before the pandemic, but there's so many things that they did right. They opened schools first, priority. Before anything else, schools open. We were like, everything else, and maybe we'll see about schools later. And this happened in deep blue areas predominantly. Schools opened in lots of places across the country. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but not in major cities where the teachers' unions were in control, or in suburban areas where the teachers' unions were in control. And I always like to say, it's not that the teachers' unions are so strong, it's that the politicians are so weak. They couldn't stand up to them. They were afraid of them. They didn't want Randy, talking about them or campaigning against them or any of that. So you had the situation where kids were just left behind. And I see that in so many different ways. I mean, just the fact that New York City doesn't have an indoor mask mandate anymore, except for kids. And it's like, they're the least likely to have a bad COVID outcome. Why are we doing this? Like, why haven't we learned anything? Why can't we follow Europe? I mean, again, I much as I hate to compliment Europe, why can't we do what they're doing and the kids are not dropping dead? So why don't we follow that? But we don't.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the new governor of New York, I've seen her all over the place, including at packed bars, watching the Buffalo Bills. And more recently, where was she without a mask? At a Broadway event with 10 people. Yet she's requiring under law that at schools and childcare facilities, age 3 and up must wear a mask.
I have a 3-year-old niece. She has to wear a mask.
How do you respond to that? Are moms, like even non-political moms, radicalized by that? Because I feel like I would be.
I wish. I'm telling you, the conformity thing that's really the central thing that's happening right now, I think, all across the country. We talk about cancel culture or whatever. All that really is a conformist message. It means do not step outside the lines. You can't talk about anything other than what we tell you can talk about. And you can only talk about it in a really narrow, specific way. So there's a writer at the New York Times, David Leonhardt. He ends up writing things that conservatives wrote like months ago. And they're like, oh, David Leonhardt said it. Okay, I guess we can unmask now outside. And I'm like, I've been writing that for a year. I've been writing for a year that masking outdoors makes no sense. I lived in Florida during the pandemic for almost 5 months. Nobody masked outside. And I mean, you can have a total leftist in Florida and they weren't masking outside because masking outside is stupid. And we all know that. But until David Leonhardt said it in the Times, New Yorkers didn't take off their masks outside. So you have this like insane conformist thing going on where people are scared. I had so many parents last year say like, I can't talk to you on the record because what if somebody calls my job and says like, Betsy wants teachers to die. And they're scared. And sometimes I don't blame them. And other times I'm like, get over it, like stand up.
Yeah. I've had that frustration when I was on campus and I would speak out. People would come up to me and they'd be like, oh, I agreed with you. And I was like, well, why didn't you say anything in class when I was 1 on 40? And I get it, but also you got to stand up at some point. Yeah. So one thing that I'm left wondering here is, when do people have enough of this in terms of the conformity culture? Like, how do we break it and get people out of it without also just kind of tossing everything to the wind and letting like actual terrible things or bad information? Because like, for example, you wrote an article questioning this assumption that we should just give kids vaccines, right? Yeah. Even though they're at no risk from COVID. But you're not an anti-vax person, right? You're not a conspiracy theorist or anything.
Not at all.
You threaded that needle. My question is kind of, how do we thread that needle of pushing those boundaries without just whacking open the floodgates and, accepting some crazy things or crazy ideas?
Yeah. The thing is, I think I threaded that needle and I pointed to a lot of data. I pointed to a lot of statements by people like Anthony Fauci or various scientists quoted by the New York Times who say that herd immunity is not possible anymore. And yet I felt like even conservatives didn't want to touch it. Like I didn't get retweets from like people who I expected to get retweets from, I think. I think it's scary for people to say things like early, right? So I think in 2 months, it's going to be accepted wisdom that we shouldn't be giving kids this vaccine because it doesn't make any sense. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I keep pointing this out. People are like, the vaccine's safe. I'm like, lots of vaccines are safe. I'm not giving those to my kids either. They just came out with a malaria vaccine. I'm sure it's safe. I'm not giving my kids a malaria vaccine. They just don't need it. So it's not that I don't think it's safe. I'm fairly sure it is. Actually, my background, straight out of college, is in the legal department at pharmaceutical companies. So I'm not one of those like big pharmas trying to get us. I'm actually kind of for big pharma. But I think that this is just unnecessary. So I think in 2 months, when it's accepted opinion, people will feel more comfortable to say kids shouldn't get this. The problem is being first or among the first. You know what? One of the things that I have a friend who always says, like, he was on Twitter the night that Jussie Smollett, that whole thing went down. And he says that he always remembers that I was like, yeah, right. Like, and he's like, that he thought that was like brave, that I was immediately like, this is clearly made up. I mean, I'm sorry, who's walking around in 2 degrees in Chicago, like in the middle of winter? It just all sounded like nonsense. So a week in, lots of people would say, oh, the Jussie Smollett thing sounds like nonsense. But it's the being first or 10th or, 50th that's hard. So I think people have to just be braver. I don't know. I'm not waiting for the left to be braver. I think they're in a really tough spot, again, with this whole conformity thing. I'm not sure when they come around, but conservatives have to be braver. I think we need to not worry about being perceived as the wrong kind of conservative, or like, oh, if you say this, then you're, a Trumper or an anti-vaxxer or whatever. And I just don't care. Like, you can call me whatever you want. I'm going to stick with my opinion until outside information makes me change my mind. I'm not going to just bow to your criticisms because I'm on the wrong side. Actually, one thing that I wrote that sort of led me in that direction, or that had me thinking this, at some point, people started to realize that masking never made sense, right? So for a long time, I was like, okay, masking outside is dumb, but masking inside, probably necessary. And then at a certain point, a lot of data kept coming out about how these masks that we were wearing, that we paid $2 for, at Old Navy, turns out they don't do anything.
The cloth ones.
Yeah, the cloth ones are completely pointless. The medical masks, like the blue ones, that don't really, they have sort of the gaps on the sides, they don't really do anything. And so I wrote a piece in the Post about it, and I had the conservatives be like, you're becoming like them, like those people, like the bad conservatives. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care who I'm becoming like. This is the data. This is what the information is. I refuse to cover that because I'll be on the wrong side of our side if I say so. And I think you just need to keep pushing on things like that. You can't let yourself become pigeonholed.
One thing I've noticed is that conservative women in particular are often braver than some of the conservative men in terms of columnists and television people. But I know Bethany Mandel went out there as one of the first people to say, that's it, I'm not hiding anymore. And they called her a grandma killer, and she went viral. And you know what? She owned it. She's like, you can call me whatever you want. I'm not depriving my kid of their life. And I'm like, we need more of that energy. And you have that same energy. So I appreciate that, Karol.
Thank you, Brad.
So to kind of round us out here, we get to the most important part of every podcast that I do. The only reason the audience actually listens to me blabber for 28 minutes. What is your most controversial food opinion?
So I think my most controversial food opinion is that wine is bad. I really think that people just pretend to like it because it does not taste good. And I don't care. Oh, did you try this one? Did you try that one? Yeah, they all taste like the same. Yes, they taste like wine. I also think, drip cold brew coffee, not a fan, but that's a secondary controversial opinion. I know I was going to lead with that, but I was like, you know what? The real controversial opinion is wine being bad, but cold brew coffee also not good. And IPAs are terrible, obviously. So those are my three.
What do you drink?
Whiskey.
Wow, that's hardcore. All right.
I mean, I like vodka and other spirits, but whiskey.
Of course, Russian vodka.
That's right.
All right, Karol Markowicz, everybody. The link to her New York Post columns and social media will be in the description. Check it out. Karol, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
you.